Above the heavenly river, the water surged violently, at times rising into towering waves, the deafening roar echoing through the heavens and earth. Along with this, a thick spiritual mist rose, shrouding the sky. Within this mist-filled world, a colossal beam of light descended. Within the beam, endless sword light surged outward, and beneath it, a figure sat in stillness, cross-legged. The sword light pierced through the figure's body relentlessly, its domineering power tearing apart flesh and blood, as if he were undergoing 1,000 cuts, a torment akin to cruel punishment. That figure, of course, was Chen. He had been sitting here for half a month, enduring the relentless barrage of sword light the entire time. During this period, his body had been torn apart countless times, with flesh, bones, and blood shattered over and over again. Yet, after each destruction, his dragon phoenix body's immense resilience allowed him to recover, only to begin the cycle anew. Such excruciating torture would break the spirit of anyone with a weaker mind, causing their soul to collapse, shattering the great opportunity granted by the Heavenly Emperor. But fortunately, Chen was not one to break easily. His years of cultivation had tempered his will, turning it as unyielding as steel. Every step of his journey had been filled with life and death struggles. He had walked through countless hardships, teetering on the edge of life and death, to achieve what he had today. So, while this true spirit baptism felt like torment, Chen would never abandon it. After enduring the sword light's wash for half a month, Chen's body had started to adapt to the process. With each cycle of destruction, his flesh, bones, and meridians were being gradually strengthened. By now, the sword light no longer shattered his body. Instead, deep sword marks appeared on his flesh, a clear sign of his body growing stronger. From Chen's estimation, his body's resilience had increased several times over. Compared to half a month ago, this brought him a sense of quiet joy. Physical refinement was the most difficult. After all, to temper the body, each trial must be stronger than the last. Yet, there had to be a balance, as too intense a trial would damage the body instead of strengthening it. The cleansing from the Heavenly Emperor's sword was perfect for this purpose. Chen's body grew stronger. The intensity of the sword light also increased, always maintaining a balance that refined him without completely destroying him. Thus, despite the unbearable pain, Chen gritted his teeth and endured. What brought him even greater joy than his body's enhancement was the growth of his spiritual power. Within his supreme sea, the ocean had expanded to an incredible size. Occasionally, waves tens of thousands of feet high would crash, each wave brimming with immense spiritual power. Above the supreme sea, sword light continued to surge, nourishing his spiritual energy. Compared to half a month ago, the spiritual power within the Supreme Sea had grown tremendously. Chen estimated that if he were to fight his half-month-ago self now, he could easily wear down his former self using the overwhelming spiritual power he now possessed. To reach this level through his own cultivation would have taken at least a year. But with this opportunity, he had achieved it in just half a month. However, the spiritual power in the Supreme Sea is becoming too overwhelming. If this continues, my Supreme Sea might soon reach its limit. As the spiritual power surged, Chen couldn't help but feel a bit worried. The Supreme Sea, though vast and boundless, had its limits. Once those limits were reached, pushing further could cause the Supreme Sea to burst. Does breaking into the Earth's supreme realm require filling the Supreme Sea first? At this stage, Chen, who had yet to touch the Earth's supreme realm, was uncertain about the answer. However, although he couldn't be sure, Chen did not stop, nor could he. This true spirit baptism was under the Heavenly Emperor's control, but if he stopped, Chen would be forced to passively accept it, unless his body collapsed first. With this thought in mind, Chen suppressed all his worries and calmed his mind, quietly sensing the rapid enhancement of his physical body and spiritual energy. And so, several more days quietly passed. The spiritual energy within the Supreme Sea finally reached its critical limit. Within the Supreme Sea, the spiritual energy churned violently, subtly carrying the feeling of expanding to the point of explosion. This caused Chen's heart to involuntarily race. He had no doubt that if this continued, his Supreme Sea would explode. However, to his nervous surprise. The Heavenly Emperor showed no signs of stopping. Could it really be that he wants to burst the Supreme Sea? Chun's emotions roiled as a feeling urged him to withdraw from this baptism. But ultimately, his rationality suppressed this urge. The Heavenly Emperor had no reason to harm him, nor any need to. Even though the once powerful being from the great thousand worlds had fallen, if the Heavenly Emperor truly wished to kill him, it would be a matter of a single movement, much like the fate of the Saint Demon Emperor Luhong. Since that wasn't the case, and the Heavenly Emperor was proceeding with this, there must be a reason for it. After hesitating for a moment, Chen chose to trust. He took a deep breath and opened his heart, allowing the endless sword light to flood into the Supreme Sea, completely filling it. When the last bit of space in the Supreme Sea was occupied, Chen felt as if the entire world had fallen silent. Cracks appeared in the space of the Supreme Sea, quickly spreading that as Chen had expected. The Supreme Sea, having reached its limit, began to shatter. This scene would likely terrify any Supreme Realm powerhouse, as the importance of the Supreme Sea was well known. Once it shattered, the spiritual energy would leak out, and all the hard cultivation would vanish in an instant. Cold sweat poured down Chen's forehead, but he remained motionless. Steady your mind and let it flow naturally. Just as Chen's heart was uneasy, the Heavenly Emperor's voice finally rang out in his mind. Hearing this, Chen finally sighed in relief, then steadied his mind, allowing the changes in the Supreme Sea to unfold. Bang! The cracks in the Supreme Sea grew more numerous, and finally, it could no longer withstand the turbulent, vast spiritual energy. With a loud explosion, it shattered. That a point of light suddenly burst from Chen's chest, the location where the Supreme Sea had been hidden. But now, that point of light expanded violently with the explosion of the Supreme Sea, quickly enveloping Chen's entire body. Bang! 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 The terrifying spiritual energy swept through Chen's body, causing all his flesh, meridians, and bones to shatter into blood mist. This shattering occurred from the inside out, and after a few breaths, even Chen's physical body exploded into blood mist in an instant. Within the blood mist, golden light emerged, and the blood mist rapidly contracted, faintly. A physical form began to reappear, as Chen frantically activated his Dragon Phoenix body to repair his shattered body. Bang! Bang! However, Chen's repair barely took shape before a terrifying surge of spiritual energy erupted again, destroying it once more. The body turned back into blood mist, and Chen poured all his strength into the repair. Bang! Repair! Bang! A cycle of destruction and repair continued endlessly. At this point, Chen finally felt relief, as his physical body had been greatly enhanced during this time. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to keep up with the speed of repair. And through this cycle of destruction and repair, Chen gradually sensed that after each repair, his body seemed to have a different feeling. That it was a true transformation. If before, Chen's physical enhancement was merely a strengthening of his body's toughness, this time, the transformation was truly from the inside out. With every piece of flesh, every cell undergoing qualitative change, the blood mist swirled, and Chen's body continued to be destroyed. But at this moment, the fear he originally felt had completely disappeared. In its place was a growing clarity. He could feel that his Supreme Sea had shattered completely, but he didn't feel any weakness. Instead, he felt an unimaginable sense of power that he had never experienced before. It was as if he could strike with a single punch and obliterate the version of himself from the past. His original Supreme Sea had indeed broken apart and vanished, but it hadn't truly disappeared. Instead, it had become omnipresent. If the Chen of the past only possessed a Supreme Sea, then now, it felt as if his body was filled with Supreme Sea. Every bit of flesh and blood seemed to have transformed into Supreme Sea, from the singular to the omnipresent. So this is Earth Supreme. Above the heavenly river, Chen, whose eyes had been tightly closed for nearly a month, suddenly opened his eyes wide. Boom! When his eyes opened, there was a brilliant flash of thunder-like energy in his gaze. The sound of a thunderous roar resonated through the heavens and earth, and an indescribable pressure of spiritual power gathered around Mu Chen's body. It then swept across the surroundings like a massive force, tearing through the sky. Whoosh! The heavenly river was directly stirred by the overwhelming spiritual pressure, creating towering waves that shattered the sky above, turning into a torrential downpour that rained down, enveloping the entire world. The surface of the river where Mu Chen stood formed a massive water vortex, thousands of feet deep. His figure hovered above the vortex, and the torrential rain, upon coming within a few feet of him, disintegrated into nothingness, unable to touch him. He stood amidst the heavy rain, his long, slender body gleaming like jade. Perhaps due to the tempering from the heavenly emperor's sword, his body exuded a sharp and chilling aura. It felt as though this was not a physical body, but a divine sword capable of piercing through the heavens and the earth. At times, dazzling spiritual light would surge from the surface of his body, only to quickly dissipate. This was because the terrifying impact of spiritual power still lingered within him. But after countless cycles of reformation, his physical body had now become capable of withstanding the shockwaves from the shattered Supreme Sea. With the flashes of spiritual light, subtle traces of the true dragon and phoenix spirit emerged from beneath his skin. These were the patterns formed from cultivating the true dragon and phoenix body. However, the once mighty spirit of the true dragon and phoenix was now only faintly visible. This was because Mu Chen's physical body had become so powerful that even the true dragon and phoenix spirit now feared its sharpness, no longer daring to reveal itself freely as it once had. The heavy rain blurred his vision, but Mu Chen's gaze gradually regained its focus. It seemed as though he had just awoken from the shock, and he looked down, stunned, at the body that had been remade through countless destructions. He could feel just how terrifying the power within this body was. This power made him feel as though it was somewhat unreal, a feeling he had long sought after for many years. Yet when this moment truly arrived, even someone as resilient as Mu Chen found himself somewhat at a loss. Mu Chen hesitated, then slowly stretched out his palm and clenched it tightly. Although he did not activate any spiritual power, space in the palm of his hand was immediately torn open, leaving behind dark spatial traces. Boom! Mu Chen casually threw a punch. The space before him instantly shattered like a mirror, and countless shards of space exploded outward. He stared blankly at this scene. Although he had thrown the punch casually, if it had been him a month ago, even with his soul-slaughtering guards, he would have been severely injured or even erased under the force of this punch. It was an overwhelming suppressive power. Is this the power of Earth Supreme? Mu Chen murmured to himself. In that moment, he suddenly felt a sense of fear. If the elders he had encountered earlier had been at his peak, even with his soul-slaughtering guards, he might not have been able to walk away unscathed. This was because, with the absolute suppression of Earth Supreme, there would be many ways to obliterate him before the soul-slaughtering guard's combat intent could even reach its full potential. However, this lingering fear lasted only for a moment before Mu Chen's lips slowly curled into a smile. After all, this terrifying power was now truly his to wield. Even if elders were to appear before him in his prime, Mu Chen would remain calm and unafraid. Far across the heavenly river, Jiyo and Mandala stood on the river's surface, their gazes fixed on the slender figure in the distance. A trace of joy appeared on their faces. Has Mu Chen succeeded? Jiyo asked, her voice filled with delight. She could already feel an overwhelming pressure emanating from Mu Chen's body. Such a force could no longer be possessed by someone at the perfect 9th grade. Half successful, Mandala replied with a smile on her face. She nodded gently. At this moment, Mu Chen had indeed begun to possess the strength of an Earth Supreme. Jiyo sighed in relief, her beautiful eyes gazing at Mu Chen's figure with a complex expression. When she first met Mu Chen all those years ago, he had seemed like a weak and inexperienced youth to her. Little did she expect that the frail boy would now be the first to step into the Earth Supreme realm, ahead of her. In the past, she had provided him with much protection, serving as a life-saving trump card for him. But now, that relationship had completely reversed. How could Jiyo not feel a sense of amazement? Why only half successful? After a moment of reflection, Jiyo suddenly remembered what Mandala had said and asked in confusion. Mandala lifted her small face and looked into the void. To advance to Earth Supreme, there's one crucial hurdle. Countless geniuses have perished at this very threshold. Juyo was taken aback, then suddenly understood, her delicate face turning serious. Is it the spiritual tribulation? The Earth Supreme is far too powerful, and whenever one is born, heaven itself becomes jealous and brings down a tribulation. This tribulation is known as the Supreme Spirit Tribulation, or simply the Spiritual Tribulation. The Spiritual Tribulation is incredibly destructive. Many geniuses who attempted to reach the Earth Supreme have been reduced to ashes under its power. It is also the greatest fear of those who are stuck at the perfect ninth grade. If the previous collapse of the Supreme Sea merely reshaped the body with spiritual power, then the Spiritual Tribulation is aimed at the Supreme Dharmakaya. True Earth Supremes no longer possess a Dharmakaya, but a far more powerful Supreme Dharma form, Mandala explained, nodding. Only those who withstand the Spiritual Tribulation with their Supreme Dharmakaya can truly evolve into the Supreme Dharma form, able to communicate more deeply with heaven and earth, wielding a power where their words become law. Chen has passed the first stage. Now, the next step is the Spiritual Tribulation. Upon hearing this, Juyo's beautiful eyes revealed a hint of worry. After all, the infamous reputation of the Spiritual Tribulation was enough to make anyone tremble. Under its fury, many once mighty geniuses had been obliterated into nothingness. Buzz. Not long after Juyo and Mandala's words, a deep humming sound suddenly echoed across the heavenly river. The sound was otherworldly, and as it rang out, the entire world began to darken. The spiritual energy in the air seemed to boil like oil in a pan, swirling violently. Chen also noticed the change. He immediately raised his head, his expression grim as he stared at the sky. He could see that the space there was twisting intensely, as endless spiritual energy began to converge, subtly forming clouds and mist at a pressure that made Chen's heart race emanated from it. Is this the legendary Spiritual Tribulation? Chen muttered to himself, his palms clenched tightly. This was the greatest hurdle on the path to becoming an Earth Supreme. Only by successfully overcoming it could he step into the realm he had always longed for. The Spiritual Tribulation mainly targets the Supreme Dharmakaya. However, if the Dharmakaya is destroyed, you will also suffer greatly, even being annihilated along with it. A calm voice came from nearby. It was the Heavenly Emperor. No one can help you through this tribulation. It all depends on your own strength, so whether you succeed or fail lies solely in your hands. Chen took a deep breath and nodded firmly. Without saying much more, he spun his hands. Instantly, the heavenly river below him surged with towering waves, and a visible torrent of spiritual energy surged outward before being devoured by Chen in one gulp. Such vast spiritual energy, if it were the Chen of the past, would have required at least half a day to absorb and refine. However, now that Chen has 1 foot in the Earth Supreme realm, he can feel that as the surging spiritual energy enters his body, it is devoured completely, without a single drop remaining, by his thirsty body. With his foot now stepping into the Earth Supreme realm, his former Supreme Sea is shattered. But from a certain perspective, the Supreme Sea has not disappeared. Instead, it has fused directly into Chen's flesh and blood, into his cells. Now, every piece of his flesh can be called the Supreme Sea, so the amount of spiritual energy his body can now contain has reached a level previously unimaginable. No wonder Earth Supremes can look down on all lower realms. Chen sighed, feeling the overwhelming, indescribable spiritual energy within him. Below the Earth Supreme realm, many powerful beings rely on a Supreme Sea as their foundation, while the Earth Supreme has a Supreme Sea everywhere within their body. Comparing the two, one can easily understand what true power suppression means. Under such suppression, no technique can compensate. Rumble. While Chen marveled at the strength of the Earth Supreme, he continued to draw in spiritual energy from the heavenly river above, clearly intending to use the abundant energy of the heavenly river to bring his own spiritual power to its peak state. Boom! As Chen absorbed more spiritual energy, the vast and terrifying energy in the sky had condensed to a frightening extent. The spiritual clouds piled up in layers, and within the clouds, Colorful lightning flashes could be seen. The booming sound echoed throughout the heavens and earth, causing everything to fall silent, as if nothing dared to challenge the might of the heavens. Chen took a deep breath again, his expression solemn. His hands suddenly formed seals, and instantly, purple gold light swept from behind him, eventually transforming into a massive purple gold giant, about several hundred feet tall, immortal golden body. As the immortal golden body manifested behind him, Chen felt the perfection of his state, and at that moment, intense battle intent erupted in his eyes. He gazed at the spiritual clouds in the sky, and couldn't help but lick his lips. Today, no one would stop his determination to step into the Earth's supreme realm. If this spiritual tribulation tries to hinder him, he would shatter it with force. Boom, boom. Above the heavenly river, thick spiritual clouds gathered, and the colorful lightning occasionally revealed its grandeur. The deep rumbling thunder resonated through the world, bringing with it an overwhelming sense of pressure. The heavenly river, which had been violently churning, gradually calmed, as if suppressed by some kind of heavenly might. Chen looked up, his face heavy with concern as he gazed at the spiritual clouds. The lightning there shimmered in a dazzling array of colors, formed by the compression of spiritual energy from the heavens and earth. Each bolt possessed terrifying power. Even the true lower earth supremes would not dare to underestimate them. Facing such colorful lightning, even though Chen's physical body had become much stronger from countless refinements, he still felt a chill run down his spine. If he wasn't careful, even his current body might not withstand the impact. The immortal golden body, colored in purple gold, stood tall behind him, radiating a never-ending aura of immortality, which gave Chen some peace of mind. This immortal golden body was the first battle he would face since he cultivated it, and Chen was clearly eager to see how much strength his long-awaited immortal golden body truly possessed. Rumble, rumble. The thunder reverberated through the heavens and earth, and everything fell silent. After a few minutes, the thick spiritual clouds in the far distance began to roll violently, and in the next instant, the clouds were torn apart, and a brilliant lightning bolt crashed down. Boom. That brilliant lightning, about 100 feet long, resembled a massive, colorful dragon. It roared down, and wherever it passed, the space itself became severely distorted, as if the vision was blurred. The colorful lightning moved with incredible speed, almost instantaneously piercing through the space. It appeared above Chen and then mercilessly struck down at the immortal golden body. Seeing this, Chen did not dare to hesitate. With a movement of his mind, the immortal golden body let out a roar, and dazzling purple gold light erupted from its body. A massive pillar of violet gold light shot out from the mouth of the immortal golden body, its radiance containing boundless and unmatched spiritual power. Boom! The two forces collided violently like meteorites. In an instant, the space at the point of impact collapsed, and the visible shockwave of spiritual energy spread outward like a tsunami, sweeping in all directions. The entire surface of the heavenly river sank under the force of the impact, with towering waves being swept up in a spectacular display. The two were releasing terrifying amounts of power, and this continued for nearly several minutes, until the violet gold pillar began to show signs of exhaustion and finally shattered under the bombardment of colorful thunder. However, although the violet gold pillar shattered, it had already consumed most of the first colorful thunder, and while the remaining thunder struck the immortal golden body, it only caused it to tremble slightly without causing any significant harm. Yet, despite blocking the first spiritual tribulation, Chen's expression didn't show any relief. Instead, it grew more solemn and cautious. The first tribulation was the weakest, but he still hadn't completely withstood it. Clearly, things would only get more dangerous from here on. He's withstood it. Nether, from a distance, showed a slight smile on her delicate face. There are 9 tribulations in total, and each one is more powerful than the last. This is just the first one. The next ones will be more troublesome. Mandala shook her head. As a top-tier expert at the perfect Earth Supreme level, her eyesight was far superior to 9 Nethers. Though Chen had resisted the first spiritual tribulation, it was clear he had struggled, and if things continued like this, it might not end well. Boom. As they spoke, the thick spiritual clouds above began to stir once again. A much larger, colorful thunderbolt appeared, hidden like a dragon lying in wait in the shadows. Boom. The spiritual clouds were suddenly torn apart, and a thicker, even more destructive, colorful thunderbolt fell directly toward the immortal golden body. Mu Chen's face turned grim. He had taken the initiative to strike earlier, but had clearly taken a slight disadvantage. He was now hesitant to engage head-on. In an instant, the immortal golden body erupted with violet gold light, forming an enormous violet gold light shield above it. The shield pulsated with incredibly terrifying spiritual energy fluctuations. This time, he clearly intended to adopt a defensive stance. Bang! As soon as the violet gold shield formed, the colorful thunderbolt struck fiercely, immediately causing cracks to form across the shield. The lightning surged like snakes, creeping into every crack and relentlessly damaging the shield. Crack! Crack! Under this constant assault, the violet gold shield could only hold out for a short time before it shattered explosively. The colorful thunderbolt struck without mercy, crashing into the immortal golden body. This strike was far stronger than the previous one. The violet gold glow surrounding the immortal golden body dimmed significantly, and Mu Chen, closely connected to the immortal golden body, was also violently jolted, coughing up a mouthful of blood. A look of shock flickered in his eyes, clearly not expecting the spiritual tribulation to be this terrifying. It seems that the power of the Supreme Dharmakaya alone isn't enough to withstand this spiritual tribulation. Mu Chen wiped the blood from his lips, his expression turning solemn. His figure moved, appearing atop the immortal golden body's shoulder. With a grasp of his hand, a blue banana fan flashed into existence. At this moment, he had no choice but to pull out all his trump cards. Boom. As Mu Chen grasped the wind god fan, the third, even more dazzling thunderbolt crashed down from the sky, its size several times larger than the previous two. Wind god gale. Without hesitation, Mu Chen activated the wind god fan, and an enormous blue whirlwind took shape in the air, carrying with it destructive power as it collided head-on with the descending thunderbolt. Boom boom. The sound of the storm echoed through the void, but this time, Mu Chen was slightly relieved. When both the immortal golden body and his own body, combined with the wind god fan, worked together, the third spiritual tribulation was finally forced back. The destructive aftershocks in the sky continued to sweep through, but eventually, the blue whirlwind and the thunderbolt dissipated. Mu Chen gazed at the dissipating thunder, and only then did his tense body relax slightly. However, his heart suddenly stirred as he sensed a peculiar energy descending from the fading thunder, merging into his immortal golden body. These energies didn't increase the power of the immortal golden body, but in that instant, Mu Chen realized that the connection between his immortal golden body and the world had grown even tighter. So this spiritual tribulation allows the Supreme Dharmakaya to deepen its connection with the world. No wonder those lower earth supremes can speak the law and summon the winds and clouds, Mu Chen realized. It was clear that the power came from the spiritual tribulation. It seemed that the spiritual tribulation was both a trial and an opportunity. Since that's the case, let the spiritual tribulation come even fiercer. Mu Chen's wind god fan gently waved in his hand, his gaze burning as he stared at the thick spiritual cloud above. Boom, boom. It seemed the spiritual cloud sensed Mu Chen's gaze, and it began to churn violently. In the next moment, the cloud tore apart, and two spiritual tribulations simultaneously descended with a thunderous crash. Mu Chen's expression turned serious as the two spiritual tribulations appeared before him. He didn't dare to be careless. The wind god fan in his hand expanded, reaching 100 meters, and his spiritual energy surged like a vast ocean, continuously flowing into it. Whoosh! With a shake of the wind god fan, several massive azure tornadoes, like wind dragons, erupted. Mu Chen had pushed the fan's power to its limit, and each of these tornadoes carried enough force to make even his past self tremble. Boom! Boom! The wind spirals collided violently with the two thunderbolts. The sky thundered endlessly, but as the wind spirals were gradually destroyed, the two spiritual tribulations were slowly weakened. Phew! Chen watched as the two weakening spiritual tribulations began to fade, and he secretly sighed in relief. Boom. However, just as he was about to relax, the two spiritual tribulations suddenly exploded. Behind them, a third spiritual tribulation quickly formed, fast as lightning, tearing through the wind spirals and charging directly at Chen. 3 spiritual tribulations at once. The sudden turn of events made the nearby 9 Nether's face change, and she couldn't help but exclaim in shock. The third spiritual tribulation appeared above Chen in the blink of an eye, but just as it was about to strike, Chen's sleeve flicked, and a stone seal flew out. A vast black ocean surged from it, waves crashing and colliding with the spiritual tribulation, ultimately neutralizing it. Truly cunning. Chen wiped the cold sweat from his brow, his heart racing. Thankfully, he had been cautious and had prepared the ocean-overturning seal in advance. Otherwise, if the third spiritual tribulation had struck earlier, it would have certainly left him badly injured. Now, there should only be 4 spiritual tribulations left. Chen raised his hand, and the ocean-overturning seal hovered in front of him. With the wind god fan in his grasp and the immortal golden body beneath his feet, glowing with golden light, he was protected within its aura. With all his defenses in place, he hoped that they would be enough to withstand the remaining 4 spiritual tribulations. The spiritual cloud above continued to churn, and increasingly thick and terrifying spiritual tribulations began to descend in waves. After enduring 5 spiritual tribulations, Chen had gained some experience. With the protection of the wind god fan and ocean-overturning seal, although the situation was perilous, he barely managed to endure each strike, holding his ground. After half an hour, all 8 spiritual tribulations had been withstood. However, though he had endured 8 tribulations, Chen's condition was far from good. His body was covered in streaks of iridescent color, marks left by the strikes of the spiritual tribulations. These colors were a sign of highly disordered spiritual energy, and if they entered his body, they would pollute his own spiritual energy like poison, causing great damage. At this moment, Chen could only continue using his spiritual energy to burn them away, until they were completely dispelled. The immortal golden body beneath his feet also began to dim, clearly exhausted from withstanding the spiritual tribulations. 8 spiritual tribulations have fallen. Only 1 left. Chen looked up, gazing at the now thinned spiritual clouds. Although only the final spiritual tribulation remained, for some reason, he didn't feel any sense of relief. Instead, there was a growing unease within him. This was because the 9th spiritual tribulation had been brewing for a long time, and it was clear that the power of this tribulation would far surpass any of the previous ones. Chen's expression grew solemn as he focused on adjusting his state, preparing for the arrival of the final tribulation. Only by surviving this would he truly be able to step into the Earth's supreme realm. In the distance, Geo also felt the increasingly terrifying oppressive force in the air. Even though she wasn't within the tribulation, she could still sense the immense pressure Chen was under. However, she said nothing, as it would be of no use. The only thing she could do now was pray for Chen, hoping that he could overcome this trial. She now understood why so many 9th-grade supreme beings feared the spiritual tribulations. Even someone as formidable as Chen, with his legendary achievements, was struggling under the weight of the tribulation. How much more so for ordinary people? Buzz. The silence in the heavens and earth lasted for quite a while. Then, the spiritual clouds high above began to churn again. Bright, multicolored light shot out in all directions, and the entire world seemed to distort under the radiance. Layer after layer of spiritual clouds swiftly coiled together, and in just a moment, they transformed into a massive dragon, resembling a cloud of mist. The giant dragon coiled in the void, its iridescent eyes locking onto Chen that a terrifying pressure enveloped the world. Mandala, watching the transformation of the spiritual clouds into a dragon, couldn't help but change her expression. She muttered, "The 9th spiritual tribulation has actually taken form? What does that mean?" Jiuyo asked quickly. Normally, spiritual tribulations take the form of thunder and lightning. But there are some rare types of tribulations that can take physical form. These tribulations are quite rare. By the way, The strength of the tribulation depends on the cultivation of the person undergoing it. Chen's immortal golden body is the second evolution of the eternal undying body. And if we were to rank it, it would definitely be in the top 15 of the 99 supreme dharmakayas. No wonder this ninth tribulation is taking form, Mandala suddenly realized as she spoke. Juya was at a loss for words. She hadn't expected Mu Chen's hard work in cultivating the immortal golden body to lead to even greater challenges. Mandala sighed lightly, smiling bitterly. Although this tribulation is dangerous, if he survives it, the benefits will be even greater. So, it's hard to say whether this is a blessing or a curse. Juyo also sighed. For most people facing the spiritual tribulation, they would probably wish to avoid one that could take physical form, as it greatly increased the chances of failure and destruction. But now that this physical tribulation had appeared, there was no point in discussing it. All they could do was hope Mu Chen could withstand it. As they spoke, Mu Chen also looked up at the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation. His face turned grim, and he chuckled bitterly. This is really troublesome. Although the dragon-shaped tribulation hadn't yet descended, he could already feel a buzzing sensation that made his scalp tingle. This level of tribulation. Even the wind god fan and the ocean overturning seal probably won't be able to stop it. Mu Chen glanced at the banana fan in his hand and the black stone seal floating before him. His brows furrowed. Facing a tribulation of this magnitude, he needed other methods to counterbalance it, if he wanted to be sure. But now, all his trump cards had been used. What else could he do? As this thought crossed his mind, Mu Chen's heart suddenly stirred. He lowered his gaze to the immortal golden body, his eyes flashing. The great sun indestructible body had once contained the nine yang divine art, and now, as its evolved form, the immortal golden body could not be so simple. Clearly, he hadn't yet tapped into all the potential of his immortal golden body, but it wasn't really Mu Chen's fault. After all, since he had cultivated the immortal golden body, he hadn't had much time to delve into it. Nevertheless, he had to pay more attention to this now. With that thought, Mu Chen closed his eyes without hesitation. Spiritual energy radiated from him as it gradually merged with his immortal golden body. In the distance, the heavenly emperor, who had been silently watching Mu Chen face the spiritual tribulation, raised an eyebrow after witnessing this. With a faint smile, he murmured to himself, finally remembered the immortal golden body. Roar. High in the sky, the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation formed by the spiritual cloud finally reached its peak, and then it let out a fierce roar, shaking the heavens and the earth with a mighty dragon's wide eye. In the next moment, the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation's tail whipped through the air and dove straight down, bringing with it a force of destruction. It charged towards Mu Chen. As the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation fell, the very sky seemed to crack open. Below, the heavenly river was violently torn apart by the terrifying force, creating a vast chasm several 100,000 feet wide. The scene was as though the heavenly river would be split in two. Boom. As the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation descended, Mu Chen flicked his finger. The wind god fan, which was unprompted by any wind, began to flap wildly, sending massive storms sweeping out in every direction. Meanwhile, the ocean overturning seal released a black ocean, with monstrous waves containing the power to crush thousands of mountains, surging toward the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation. Bang, bang, the powers of the two sacred artifacts were unleashed to their fullest. Yet when the whirlwind storms and the waves collided with the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation, the storm was instantly torn apart, and the waves were crushed without a trace. The dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation broke through the defenses of both sacred artifacts with an unstoppable momentum. From afar, Juyo's face turned pale with shock. Just moments ago, Mu Chen had relied on the two sacred artifacts to block most of the spiritual tribulation's power, but before the ninth dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation, it was entirely ineffective. Boom! The wind god fan was blasted back by the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation, and the ocean overturning seal was also forced back. This left Mu Chen completely exposed beneath the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation. Boom! Boom! The deafening sound of explosions mixed with the roar of the dragon echoed from above. Yet Mu Chen remained as still as a mountain, his heart and mind completely fused with the immortal golden body. He needed to fully integrate with the immortal golden body to unleash its innate divine abilities. The violent shockwaves descended from above, instantly causing blood mist to erupt from Mu Chen's skin, transforming him into a blood-drenched figure. Yet he remained unmoving, as if he had given up resistance. From a distance, Jiyo gritted her teeth, her silver fangs biting into her red lips. Her fingers dug deep into her palm. 100 feet, 50 feet, 10 feet, and just as the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation entered the range of 10 feet above Mu Chen, his tightly shut eyes suddenly opened. His originally pitch-black pupils transformed into a dazzling purple-gold color. He raised one hand and formed a seal, and the immortal golden body beneath him did the same. Whoosh! Radiant purple-gold light exploded from the immortal golden body. The light gathered frantically, forming two massive purple-gold light patterns at an astonishing speed. The two purple-gold light patterns emitted an indescribable ancient aura, mysterious and unfathomable, as though created by the hand of a deity. The mysterious purple-gold light patterns coalesced, and Mu Chen raised his head to gaze. At the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation before him, a low voice escaped his lips. When heaven and earth shatter, I remain immortal. Immortal divine runes. Mu Chen raised his palm and clenched it tightly. In that instant, the two purple-gold light patterns shot out like colossal purple-gold dragons, intertwining above him. The purple-gold light exploded, and the two light patterns fused into a thin, purple-gold shield. Boom! The moment the purple-gold shield formed, the dragon-shaped spiritual tribulation struck with immense force, crashing into the thin purple-gold shield with a devastating blow. It was like the sun rising from the earth, and then an indescribable shockwave rampaged across the surroundings. The entire space between heaven and earth shattered at that moment, with countless fragments of space shooting out. The heavenly river below collapsed into a massive pit hundreds of thousands of feet deep, and the sea water surged, unable to fill it. Mandala waved her little hand, and a spiritual energy barrier appeared in front of her and Jiyo, blocking the violent shockwave. Meanwhile, the heavenly emperor stood with his hands behind his back, effortlessly letting all impacts disperse into the wind as they reached him. The destructive force of heaven and earth continued for several minutes before it gradually dissipated. At this moment, Jiyo quickly turned her gaze to the spot where Mu Chen had been earlier, her jade-like hands tightly clenched in anxious anticipation. She clearly wanted to know if Mu Chen had succeeded or failed in overcoming the terrifying spiritual tribulation. The destructive shockwave that swept through the heavens and earth gradually dissipated after a long period, and the gaze of Jiyo and the others was immediately drawn to the source of the impact. The previously distorted space in that area began to slowly restore itself, and then, it seemed as if a burst of purple-gold light suddenly erupted that a massive beam of light soared into the sky. Within the beam of light, a giant, around several hundred feet tall, made of purple gold stood still. Around the giant's body swirled an immortal aura, as if it were eternal and unceasing. Jiyo stared at the purple gold giant at this moment. The immortal golden body seemed no different from before, but if one sensed carefully, they would notice that the giant exuded a strange feeling of blending with the heavens and earth. With every breath, it seemed to give birth to winds and thunder. This immortal golden body now seemed to easily communicate with the spiritual energy of the heavens and earth, even being able to merge its will into the vast world, taking control of it. Any individual whose strength was below Mu Chen's, upon entering this world, would essentially have stepped into Mu Chen's domain. Their life and death would be at his command. Jiyo looked at the face of the immortal golden body. The face of the previous Supreme Dharma body had always been rather vague, but now, the face of the immortal golden body was exactly the same as Mu Chen's. From a distance, it looked like a magnified version of Mu Chen himself. This was because the connection between Mu Chen and the immortal golden body had deepened. The two were perfectly merged, and Mu Chen could even directly fuse with the immortal golden body to unleash even more terrifying power. This was similar to Elder Zhua, who had swallowed the Supreme Dharma body. fusing the two together, the power that was unleashed left. Even Chen, who had the assistance of the soul-slaughtering guards, astonished on the shoulder of the immortal golden body, sat a slender figure in meditation. At this moment, Chen's body was bathed in dazzling purple gold light. The colorful sparks from the previous spiritual tribulation were now completely dissolved. His figure stood as still as a rock, with an aura that seemed to extend endlessly, while the purple gold light that surrounded him rippled with immense spiritual energy. Every ripple contained terrifying waves of spiritual energy. Though Chen was motionless, Jiao felt an intense pressure radiating from him. It was a kind of pressure she had only felt before from those who had reached the Earth's supreme realm, the super-powerful beings. Buzz. While Jiao watched, Chen's tightly closed eyes suddenly snapped open. In an instant, dazzling purple gold light shot from his eyes, sharp enough to tear through the space in front of him, splitting it apart. The purple gold light lasted only a moment before dissipating. That Chen raised his gaze, and the world seemed to have taken on a strange new feeling. That it was as though he had gained a sudden understanding that if he wished, he could now freely manipulate the immense spiritual energy of the heavens and earth. He extended his hand, and in an instant, brilliant spiritual energy gathered before him, forming a mountain about 100 feet high. The mountain shimmered with crystal clear, dazzling colors, almost like crystal. Yet, it was solidified from pure, untainted spiritual energy, and was indestructible. Heaven and earth phenomenon. Chen muttered to himself. This was one of the signs of the Earth Supreme. To be able to effortlessly turn the spiritual energy of the heavens and earth into tangible form was something he could never have done before. This symbolized an unimaginable level of control over spiritual energy by the Earth Supreme. Chen lowered his head, sensing that his physical body now seemed to possess a life force, breathing on its own. However, with every breath, immense spiritual energy from the heavens and earth was absorbed and refined. The speed at which this energy was absorbed and refined was astonishing. His body seemed to be an endless void, incapable of being filled, no matter how vast the spiritual energy poured into it. Previously, Chen only had a supreme sea inside him, but now, every part of his flesh seemed to pulsate with power. Each piece of flesh felt like it housed a supreme sea, greedily consuming all the spiritual energy it could. Chen, somewhat entranced, squinted his eyes. The feeling of this overwhelming and endless power was intoxicating. Only now did he truly understand why, in this vast world, one could only be called a superpower and dominate a realm after reaching the Earth Supreme. The gap between this power and the 9-grade Supreme stage was as vast as the difference between a bright moon and a firefly. Chen extended his hand slowly and clenched his fist. The mountain of spiritual power in front of him shattered, turning into countless points of light. That a faint smile curved at the corner of his mouth. Earth Supreme Realm. I've finally reached it. As he completely passed through the spiritual tribulation, Chen had clearly become a true lower Earth Supreme. While Chen was basking in the power, a light suddenly gathered at his forehead, and a massive flow of information surged into his mind. The information was the supreme divine ability that the Heavenly Emperor had once imparted through the true spirit baptism. The One Qi transforms 3 purities. However, before, Chen had been unable to comprehend or imagine the intricacies of the One Qi transforms 3 purities due to his limited strength. But now, with his breakthrough, those previously unclear aspects suddenly felt like a veil lifting in his mind. Only now could he truly accept the Heavenly Emperor's experience and insights. So that's how it is. The many profound points about the One Qi transforms 3 purities were now easily understood by Chen, and he let out a sound of realization in his heart. The once obscure and incomprehensible supreme divine ability was now taking shape in his mind. Of course, all of this was because of the Heavenly Emperor's guidance on the One Qi transforms 3 purities. Otherwise, even with Chen's breakthrough to the Earth Supreme Realm, it would have taken him several years to slowly comprehend it. But now, with the Heavenly Emperor's help, those years of understanding were skipped, allowing Chen to ascend in one leap. The spiritual light in Chen's eyes flickered continuously as he sat still, maintaining the position for half a day. Finally, At a certain moment, his eyes suddenly snapped open and he slowly raised his hand and formed a seal that radiated an ancient aura. Buzz. When the seal was completed, a mysterious sound wave seemed to echo through the world, spreading outward. One chi transforms, three purities, sever my vision of truth. Sever my blade. The murmurs of his voice carried an inexplicable rhythm, slowly echoing from Mu Chen's mouth. Then, suddenly, a beam of spiritual light erupted from the top of his head, swirling in front of him, forming an illusory blade. The light blade was incredibly strange. Though it existed, it gave off a sense of being intangible, as if it could not be touched, merely a figment of imagination. What is he doing? Nine Nether gazed at the scene, her voice laced with confusion. Mandala pondered for a moment and said, "If I'm not mistaken, he should be practicing the one chi transforms, three purities." At this point, even she couldn't help but feel a tremor. After all, the reputation of one chi transforms, three purities was immense. The Heavenly Emperor had once soared to the peak of the Great Thousand Worlds through this variability. Now, could Mu Chen actually succeed in cultivating this supreme divine ability? The opportunity Mu Chen had was so rare that even Mandala couldn't help but feel a sense of envy. Sever. While they spoke, Mu Chen suddenly rose to his feet, his gaze locked onto the illusory blade. He raised one hand, forming a seal, and a thunderous roar resonated throughout the air. Buzz. The illusory blade trembled slightly, then tilted downward. Its edge sliced through the void, and without hesitation, it plunged toward Mu Chen's heavenly spirit cap, delivering a heavy strike. Mu Chen remained motionless. Whoosh. The illusory blade struck his heavenly spirit cap, and in the next moment, it passed through his body like an illusion. The blade pierced through Mu Chen's form. When the blade left Mu Chen's body, a streak of blood-red light was drawn from him. The blood light coiled at Mu Chen's right side, constantly writhing and emitting strange waves. At the moment of the strike, Mu Chen faintly felt that something within his body had been separated, like flesh and blood, or perhaps his very soul. However, this separation caused him no harm. It merely shifted from within him to outside. Strike again. Mu Chen tilted his head back and shouted fiercely. Whoosh! The illusory blade swung down once again, cleaving through his body. However, as it detached from Mu Chen's form, a burst of bloodlight separated from his body. With two strikes, the illusory blade shattered quietly, transforming into fragments of spiritual light that fell to the ground. Mu Chen turned his head, his gaze fixed without a blink on the two bloodlights beside him. The bloodlight continued to writhe, slowly forming into two slender figures. One figure was clad in black robes, the other in white. Both had deep, dark eyes and handsome faces. More importantly, their bodies emitted an aura and powerful spiritual energy that was identical to Mu Chen's. These two figures were unmistakably true Earth Supremes. Mu Chen gazed at the two identical figures, a smile slowly forming on his face. He chuckled lightly and raised one hand in a salute, saying, "I am Mu Chen." The figure in black and the one in white also smiled faintly and saluted in the same manner. "I am Mu Chen. I am Mu Chen."